Moving right along here. Okay, we've heard today about startups, we've heard about VCs, we've heard about a lot of different things. Now it's the time to learn about what companies are doing with startups. So corporate venturing versus venture capital. The advantages and the disadvantages, hopefully we'll hear today as well. So let me introduce to you some of the people before they come up here on stage. But we have a very exciting panel that is going to be moderated by Rebecca Jimeno. Rebecca is a well-known journalist in this country. She's also an economist, and she's been looking at this field of corporate venturing for quite a long time. So who do we have here that are going to talk about corporate venturing? We have Gwenia Gavendo from Telefónica Innovation and Ventures. We have Itazo de Palacio, Microsoft Ventures. We have Nick Nigam from Samsung Next, based in Berlin, the venture fund of Samsung. We have Octavio Soler from Instant Credit, which is a fintech based in Barcelona, which has been recently acquired by another venture arm, and that one is represented by Julio Martinez from Sabadell InnoCells. Now, as you know, we have a great relationship with Banco Sabadell. They're probably one of the most creative and startup banks in this country. So, now, I would like you to welcome me, Rebecca, Gwenia, Itazo, Nick, Octavio, and Julio. Thank you.
You guys say? Okay. Thank you. Good morning, and welcome to this session on corporate venturing. We thank you for being here because we know there is a lot of competition out there, a lot of panels going on. And we are going to have an engaging discussion with our 5 speakers. But before that, let me set the stage here. Companies, they know they cannot survive without innovation. And innovation has become one of the key drivers of growth in companies. And that's why 70% of companies worldwide are increasing their money in this area. So this investment on innovation, and this innovation can come in many different ways. Some companies pursue it through in-house research and development, or looking for strategic alliances. But there is another way, corporate venturing. And this new tool is increasingly helping companies to gain on edge on this global landscape, disruptive economic world we all talk about all the time. Now, corporate venture provides the startup with the capital, but also with the know-how, with the access to markets, and also relevant contacts. This is very important for the startup. And the startup brings into the company the market insights, disruptive technologies, talent, and new valuable ideas. So this corporate venturing is growing really fast, and last year hit a record on $37 billion. And it was present at 44 of all the venture deals that were closed last year, 44%. So this is like the new guy in town, and we have these guys here, some of them, and they're going to talk about their strategies on their companies on corporate venturing. So I'm going to introduce them now. I have Itazo del Palacio, and she works at M12. It's the Microsoft Venture Fund, and she's based in London, and she's also a professor on venture capital. Octavio Soler, he's the founder of Instant Credit. This is a startup, was just created 2 years ago, and is specialized in consumer financing. This is a fast-growing sector, and it was just bought by InnoCells, Banco Sabadell, last summer. We have Gwenia Gavendo, and she's the Scouting and Innovation Investment Director at Telefónica. Before that, she was the head officer of Telefónica at Silicon Valley. Nick, he's the principal at Samsung Next. He's based in Berlin, and is the innovation group within Samsung. Nick is looking for software companies and services startups companies. And we have Julio Martinez of InnoCells. This is the Banco Sabadell, the venture half of Banco Sabadell. And so far, they have invested in more than 50, 60 startups. So first question would be, what is your corporate venture model? Because we know there are different kinds. We want to know about yours. And what do you think your company hopes to achieve through this program? So I will start with you.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Just to be completely honest, in fact, I've been for a year and a half at M12, or Microsoft's venture fund. I'm just now moving on, in fact, and that's why it says former. Still working with them. We've done over 60 investments in the last 3 years, very active all over the world. So the model at Microsoft, the way it works is that the investment team is practically separate from the corporate. We have been investing without any approval from business units. So everybody within the investment team comes from an investment background. I've been in venture capital for the last 7 years, and so my colleagues, right, all of them come from Trinity Ventures or Intel Capital, Georgian in the US. And so that makes a difference first, because we are not looking for investments that are related necessarily with Microsoft, but that can enhance things that we do internally, and or not even related to them, but they are getting very strong in the market. And two, it is very important too, because we move very fast, right? We don't need the approval, internal approval for that. So the fund is a separate entity, and we invest. Basically, the decision-making process is completely independent. And what is in for the corporate? So once we invest in the companies, we have a portfolio development team, which is, yes, former Microsoft team, and they help the companies getting connected to the right departments, business units internally, which is good for Microsoft, but really is not going to change the needle into our balance sheet, but it can improve the innovation, the collaboration with blockchain startups, with autonomous vehicles, technologies that we will not build internally, but still might be interesting in the next couple of years.
Genia, can you tell us a little bit about Telefonica's strategy?
Our model is a little bit different. We are actually looking very actively for startups that can work with Telefonica. And they can be everywhere. No? They can be in Silicon Valley, they can be in Israel, in other geography. And usually we're looking for companies that we can help us improve our operations, but also build new products and new things that we can offer to our customers. We usually invest, we are looking for commercial agreements, but we look for investments when this relationship is really, really close and we want to help and develop, be part of the product development. That's when we invest. So we usually look this role of getting the company to know the business units we do before. So we usually need the business unit sponsoring the investments from our side, which is actually good news, because once you've made the investment, we are very, very sure that we are going to work with that company, we're going to help them grow, and we're going to leverage all the advantages that being with Telefonica.
And Nick, what is Samsung looking for? You were telling me the company wants to change from a hardware to a software company, and you're helping?
Correct, yeah. So Samsung itself is obviously great at hardware. It needs to be better at software. And so our group is faced with a very unique but also challenging mission to help Samsung transform from just a hardware company to one which does software very well. There's obviously good internal efforts around that. Our group looks externally mainly. We do that primarily through investments in M&A, but we also do have some partnership and product dev initiatives. From the investment side, for the purposes of this panel, a little bit more similar to M12. So we have our own structured fund with a single LP, our own independent investment committee, so we don't need business unit sponsorship for the deals. At the earlier stage, we're looking less strategically. We're both a financial and a strategic fund. The later stage a startup gets, generally a lot of the startups in our portfolio actually are looking for some kind of value add from Samsung. And so we do try to provide that through various means. Yeah, we also have a platform team. We have a team in Korea which helps connect startups. But it's not a requirement on our end, and honestly, sometimes we can't promise it either. So in terms of what Samsung Next is looking for, We are really trying to keep our ear close to the ground. We obviously want to make good use of Samsung's capital. If it turns into collaborations, if it turns into partnerships, if it turns into M&A one day, great. But all these options are attractive to us.
Julio, InnoCell has grown a lot in the last years. Can you tell us about your strategy?
Of course. Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here, Rebecca. So at InnoCells, we have a particular approach to corporate venturing. And we combine 4 elements to drive new business for the bank. First of all, we engage in traditional corporate venture capital. So we undertake minority stakes in startups, typically at a more mature stage, Series A+. And our ambition there would be to partner with them, similar to your approach, right? To partner with them and see what our corporate assets can add to their growth story. Secondly, our second element would be often we may find opportunities that are too strategic for us to only have a minority stake. So imagine you find a solution in the market that you want to deploy to all your user base. In that scenario, it might make sense to have a controlling stake. So instead of pushing terms that are too aggressive and you want to have a ROFO and this kind of aggressive terms, we guide the conversation to a different angle, right? So maybe we want to acquire and grow together with the startup and instant credit, and yesterday we announced our second M&A deal. So that are perfect examples of how digital M&A can also play to the strategy. The third element would be to invest in funds, and that makes sense for us and we have done a couple of investments in funds. So, for instance, Cardamom Capital to access Israel. So often you want to scout the opportunities in markets that are not that natural for you, right? So your corporate doesn't have a presence there, and it makes sense to partner with a fund and have scouting capabilities in a country to tap top-notch talent and also technology. And our fourth element, and this is last but not least, we have a venture builder. So we have a team that identifies wide spaces and opportunities so that we can launch startups into the market. And this is more early stage when we look at the InnoCells portfolio. So that's going to be early stage. So therefore more financial upside, obviously, but also a lot of strategic learnings in terms of understanding what is traction in the digital space.
I didn't tell you, but we are going to talk about corporate venturing from both sides. We have a startup here who can tell us about his experience with corporate venturing. And Octavio, you sold your company. It was 2 years ago. You just created, and 2 years later you sold it to the bank. How do you think a corporate can help you boost your baby startup, because it's only 2 years old? And what is your experience?
Yeah, well, that was let's say an unexpected deal, actually, because after 2 years of founding your own company, it's kind of not common to be 100% acquired by a bank, right? But in our case, basically, first we are a marketplace. Basically, we're a payment method focused to e-commerce, especially in Spain and in other countries, where we are an intermediary platform which we integrate with e-commerce merchants to provide a pay later solution through a loan. And we integrate on the other side different lenders, which can be banks or financial entities, in order to provide that loan. So basically, we're in the same arena than Klarna, for example, but Klarna, especially based in Northern Europe. Coming from online payments as myself, before instant credit, we noticed a need, especially for large multi-country merchants, for a single solution which covers many different markets as a pay later method. And we found that the best way was to be an intermediary and to integrate different lenders in different countries, because it's not so easy for a lender to expand into different European countries. So we will launch the business around 2 years and a half ago, and we were doing a funding round, a funding negative round. We were not expecting to sell the company, and actually we were talking to Sabadell as a potential lender, as a potential business partner.
And
then InnoCells and Julio appeared in the equation, and so there was then we started the discussions, which ended up last June in a 100% sale of a company. Let's say, what value do we see or do I see on that in our case? Because of course that depends on each case. But in our case, we see that partnering with InnoSales and Sabadell Bank could speed up, obviously, very significantly our business. We remain as an independent company, so we've not been, let's say, melted into the bank.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that deal would not have happened. And we keep our business model intact. So we work with the bank. There's a lot of projects that were identified before the deal, very specific projects that could, let's say, accelerate the digitalization of Banco Sabadell and at the same time speed up a lot our business, which is basically, just give you two examples. Sabadell is very strong in payments in e-commerce. They have around 19,000 e-commerce merchants in Spain, plus many more in the offline arena. And so we will be a payment method for all those merchants. So we will basically accelerate volumes, but at the same time, we keep our multi-lender approach. So we can work with different other banks, additional banks, and obviously to expand, let's say, faster internationally. So those were the things that we considered when
And you accepted the proposal.
during
Julio,
those
can you tell
conversations.
us very briefly, what do you think are the advantages of corporate venturing in this particular case for instant credit versus a venture capital?
So I think it relates to the corporate assets that you can deploy, right? So it's not only about the money, which any VC can deploy, and VCs, financial VCs are getting super smart about providing not only money, but additional services, and Andreessen Horowitz or Atomico in Europe are leading that wave in providing operational partners and so on. When it comes to a corporate, entrepreneurs can reflect a lot about what is the corporate assets that you can tap on. And in this case, as Octavio was mentioning, it was access to the market. So we are the leader in e-commerce payments in Spain, and obviously accessing those merchants and becoming a distribution channel. I think it's a compelling value proposition.
Once the deal is done, what are the main challenges of having this corporate investor in your cap table? Let's start with Venia. She's smiling at me. You want to tell us something?
No, because we do a lot of the work before, it's easier when we get into the timetable. Usually know that we are going to work together. So it's a longer process, but then when it's done, it's easy onboarding then. I think as a corporate, as we said, we like to work with, building on what Julio said, it's good to work with other financial investors because we bring different things on the table.
Challenges from the startup side or from the corporate side?
From the corporate side.
From the corporate side, it's same challenges with any investor. It's making sure that the startup which you've invested in is succeeding and doing all you can to enable that. And if there's a certain angle that they wanted your help with before they decided to have you on their cap table, then it's about just making sure that you know what your value add is and what you can provide. It's also managing expectations to a certain degree in case. I'm always wary of startups which are relying too much on a strategic round, actually. If there's too many strategics in the round and the startup thinks that's going to make them, then it's usually a bad signal. And there's a whole bunch of challenges from the other side as well, depending on which corporate's investing. But that's another discussion.
I would definitely say there is a big challenge for startups in terms of they have no control on what the strategy changes at the corporates are. Just corporates change their strategies all the time. So from one day to another one, that the sponsor of that deal that you just found over 6 months moved to another department, what happens with that? And from the strategy departments in Seattle or wherever it is, they change the strategy, there is no follow-on funding. Of course there is, in my opinion, you gotta understand that having a very strong strategic investor on your cap table might be challenging in the future. It's not a 10-year fund where you can see very clearly what is happening, what their reserves for follow-on rounds are, what those founders are determined to deliver to their LPs. No, there is a strategy somewhere
Yeah.
that you have no access to, and there is people moving in corporates that you have no determination on that. So I definitely think that it might be very challenging.
100%. Just to add to that, Rebecca, at the beginning you mentioned the growth of corporate venture capital over the last 5 years, the number of funds which have popped up, the number of deals, percentage-wise, which have a CVC on board. It's dangerous, actually. The same thing has happened every time there's been a bit of a boom. Same thing happened in the 90s, and then after the crash, they all disappeared. And that will happen this time around when there's another crash. So startups which are looking for CVCs, they need to very carefully evaluate what type of stakeholder approval they have, how long they're going to be around for, and what happens if they disappear. So they shouldn't be overly reliant.
Yeah, that's a good point. Julio, what do you think?
Yeah, I fully agree with my colleagues, actually. So Banco Sabadell has a lot of experience in that. So as you mentioned, we have invested in over 60 startups through Be a Startup, which has been around for a long time, and then also Sabadell Venture Capital, and we are coming from a strategic angle. And what we see is, from a strategic perspective, I would be very careful, as if I were an entrepreneur, with conflicts of interest. So often strategic investors have very particular interest to be in a cap table, and look, for instance, if you're a B2B and then the corporate invests in a B2B and it becomes the vendor of this corporate, but also the startup needs to sell to other corporates, competitors of the investor. Look, you want that corporate to, you want to exclude that company, that corporate from the board of directors, for instance, right? So as an entrepreneur, as a CEO and a founder, you don't want to spend too much time managing information flows in your board of directors. You want to have a very transparent and a very easy environment, supportive, and you don't want to start mixing commercial terms with investment terms. So definitely I would be very careful about the mindset of the corporate that is trying to access to your cap table and seeing if it's going to be more supportive or if it's going to be cumbersome and a thing to manage and bureaucracy and politics within your board.
And
well, from my perspective, of course, I fully agree that it's very challenging, but there's as well, let's say, some elements that help to make it, let's say, less difficult, or at least to reduce the difficulties of the integration, how to work together, etc. And those, at least talking about our case, one of those is to have the support of the top management of the corporate that is acquiring you. And so it has to be, top people, top execs of the corporate involved, for example, at the board level in our case, right? So there's a support from up, down to the startup. And there is a follow-up meetings, or there's a board, etc. So they have to be really following it up. As well, another aspect is to be relevant to the corporate. So if you, if a startup is acquired by a big corporate that has like a lot of businesses and the business of that startup is not relevant, basically.
They might forget
or
about
not much relevant to the corporate, then of course, there's the challenge increase. In our case, we believe we are pretty relevant because there were, as I said, different projects of integration with different businesses of the bank already planned before the acquisition, which are happening now, and that helps as well. So there's different elements that could help to reduce the challenge.
I think I totally agree with you, because if the company is really strategic, really strategic, the strategy and the business sponsor can change, but we do have history with Telefnica. We've been doing almost 10 years of CVC, and we have history of companies that we have been following all this time, and teams have changed. The strategy may have shifted, but because of their relevance and importance to our business, we are still supporting them.
So maybe one of the keys of success is limiting to the area of the business you really know, because if you go somewhere else, maybe you're not very sure you're going to need that startup, but you don't do that strategy. Microsoft invests in all kinds of startups.
So we invest in any startup, obviously B2B, software. This is not hardware. We are not a hardware company that can lie within the Microsoft umbrella, and I know that it's very broad. It is not sector specific, because obviously we cover many different sectors, and many of our technologies, in fact, are horizontal, and they touch many products as well as many verticals.
Are you the serious guys in the room when you meet with these startups, or you are on the same line?
The same line, yeah.
What do you feel?
I think we are in, we have good rapport, as we say.
Ask the guy with the shirt on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Julio?
No,
Yeah.
You're the banker.
So I think it's appreciated these days what corporates can bring to the table when it comes to dealing with the startups. What I think is that we need to see a wave of sophistication in terms of the value proposition that corporates put on the table. So we need to, obviously, these are best practices, all of them. So you need dedicated teams with a lot of expertise on the domain the startup operates, and have very clear goals and very clear goals and objectives to achieve together.
Any more comments? Octavio, what do you think
About?
the serious guys in the room?
No, well, in our case, they were not serious at all. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, but I think they share the same ADN in a way. So, because Innocell is part of, let's say, a bank group, but they're as well like us, an independent arm, let's say, and the ADN is pretty similar than ours, right? So that helped a lot in the conversations to have a common view. But of course, that depends on the corporate. I mean, I've met corporates which, let's say, are far away from our DNA, so it depends on each case.
So last question would be, in this world that is changing so fast, and a company will end up doing this corporate venturing because it's the only way to do is in-house research and complement it with this venture corporate. It's the only way to meet the needs of the digital world we're going to. Do you agree?
From the corporate side, you are asking?
Yes, they're all going to do the same, all companies.
I'm not an expert on that space. I know some models, but I don't know all the models, and I don't know how every other corporate does it. I do think this model, it is good, and it helps the companies learning from outside and getting the best technologies to build products on your ecosystem, definitely.
Just one line, we're running out of time.
I think I'm going to steal a phrase from Professor Henry Chesborough that he presented yesterday. He actually said, the future of innovation is collaboration, and I said to him, I think the present of innovation is collaboration. Yeah. The speed that things are moving, you have to collaborate, you have to work outside.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, there's R&D, as you mentioned, and there's also collaboration, and to us, collaboration takes many forms. It's investments, it's M&A, it's partnerships. If you look at the dollars going into CVC versus R&D in terms of the pace, it's triple or even more that of R&D, and I think there's been some studies as well which show that it's actually a better investment than R&D in terms of patents granted and everything like that. But I think any enterprise needs to explore many different means and figure out what's best for them.
And Julio?
Yeah, so I think the innovation mandate needs to remain within the corporate. So I think that having an outside-in model as corporate venturing does not exclude the corporate from the responsibility to renovate their business. So that's something that needs to be tied to their incentives, whatever it is, but the corporate needs to be focusing on innovation. However, having an external unit makes a lot of sense, right? Precisely tying back to your previous question, you need a dedicated team that is separate, that it's kind of a tribe that is closer to the startup world, understand better their needs, and engages better, so that you scout for innovation and make sure you digest it in the corporate.
Okay, thank you for great answers. We hope you enjoy, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the South Summit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.